Chapter 8, A Call for Reason. Hey, Dad, come in here quick. There's some guy on TV being interviewed on Larry King Live, and they're talking about you. Bill stepped in from the adjoining hotel room just a moment before a Quiznos commercial flashed on the screen. What? Oh, that was Samuel Hawkins. He's the chair of the neuroscience department at Cambridge. So what were they talking about? I only caught a little bit of it. They mentioned your name, and then Larry King just said he wanted to know why this guy wrote his book and would he consider a debate with one of the ID theorists. Oh, well, I can give you an answer right now about the debate question. Just then, Larry King was back. Again, Dr. Hawkins, what motivated your book? He held it up high. Twilight, the end of the scientific age. Well, most people realize that these are trying times, and the very future of science, and indeed of civilization itself, depends on our response. The long war of religion against science may have finally brought us to the twilight of this age. And how does this relate to the latest news about support for intelligent design theory? First of all, the so-called intelligent design myth bears no resemblance to a scientific theory. It is motivated by and based on untestable revelation contained in the Bible. There is no experiment that can prove or disprove its claims, and as such it cannot be scientific. In fact, intelligent design is nothing more than old creationism dressed up in a new suit. All right, I suppose this is what we'd expect from an atheist, or is this what's called the new atheism? Yes, but there's more. The new atheists don't make any distinction between the Islamic suicide bomber, the snake-handling fundamentalist, or even the liberal theologian who rejects the Bible. We hold them all responsible for the crimes and wars throughout all of history. Either they're directly responsible for specific crimes or part of the problem as unwitting enablers. Okay, that about covers it, but still, what's new about your book that might convince someone to follow your new way? Well, just let me say at the onset, mine is an optimistic view that some actually say borders on faith. I believe that many people today recognize the danger of religious fundamentalism and more than ever ready to consider the only reasonable alternative, evolutionary naturalism. Science has proved the theory of evolution to such a degree that it's rightly called a scientific fact, like gravity, electricity, or the laws of motion. Further, the so-called proofs for special creation, or any form of creation, have long been discredited. Thus, we can say today there are no credentialed scientists who believe in creation of any stripe. Now, Dr. Hawkins, is your last statement strictly true? After all, Dr. Elder, the molecular biologist who recently set forth a new theory for DNA code, seems to be saying he believes in creation. This species of scientist is extremely rare and will soon become extinct. I'm making a generalization that holds true for every discipline of science. Very well, but what about this new discovery that seems to prove the claims of creationists? I don't spend a lot of time looking into every claim made by these creationist clowns, but I have it on good authority that there's nothing new here. What I can tell you is that the design argument, intelligent or otherwise, was refuted by the Scottish philosopher David Hume over 2 centuries ago. Proof for design is and always has been based on bad reasoning. Well, there you have it, folks, although I expect those of the religious persuasion may not be entirely satisfied. Anything else, Dr. Hawkins? Turning towards the camera, his detached expression turned to concern. Yes, I do want to leave one last message with your listeners. It should be obvious to all reasonable people that our freedoms are eroding every day. However, there is an even greater danger before us because the proliferation of WWDs, that is, weapons of world destruction, and the rise of religious fundamentalism, we face apocalyptic dangers without precedent in all of history. However, today the only people hard-headed enough to fight the religious lunatics of the Muslim world are the religious lunatics of the West. This must stop, and reason must finally prevail. Our children, and indeed the whole of civilization, depends on our determination to shake off religious delusions, lest we be destroyed by God made in our own image. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hawkins. You've given us all something to think about. Turning towards the camera and shifting to a light-hearted tone, he said, "Please stand by for our next guest, the entertaining and always controversial Rosie O'Donnell." Andrew faded down the sound just as the Vonage TV commercial theme music began. "Wow, Dad, that guy takes no prisoners." Yeah, it's kind of scary to hear a prophecy of your own extinction. Even so, Samuel Hawkins seems to be unaware that virtually all the disciplines of science were founded by Christians motivated by faith in a creator God who not only established moral laws for man, but also physical laws for nature. I know he's really over the top, but what about that religious wars and crimes business? I hear that all the time at the university. Well, Andrew, you may not be surprised to hear me say that it's simply not true. The fact is that atheism had its chance in the 20th century, which finally proved that a war against God is far worse than all the religious wars combined. When you account for all the deaths associated with any kind of religious war in all of history and compare this to the number of deaths associated with the atheistic Darwinist movements of the last century alone, that would include Nazism, fascism, communism, then there were 10 to 20 times more millions of deaths that must be accounted for when reason prevailed. Then there's the embarrassing little matter of social Darwinism and its bitter fruit, eugenics. Yes, the Nazis carried this to a monstrous end, but in America, thousands were sterilized for unjustifiable reasons, including racism, in order to advance human evolution. All this was undeniably mainstream evolutionary theory in the first half of the 20th century. For my part, I don't take any responsibility for those who attempt to use the name of Christ to murder and abuse innocent people. Again, I think this guy went too far. I believe there is a God, but the concern about the loss of freedom seems to be valid. Andrew, I expect you're aware that every time in history that atheism was in power, it likewise took no prisoners. And I mean that literally. It was always off with their heads. There was no freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of ownership, or freedom of any kind guaranteed under any of these atheistic regimes. That is what happens when people don't recognize that all people were created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh yeah, Dad, I learned all that stuff in school, but it seems like there is more danger of religious people imposing their morality on others these days. Well, Andrew, let me ask you a question. When you were at the university, is it more likely you be censored for religious speech or anti-religious speech? Okay, I get your point. I guess the public universities have turned things upside down. And don't forget the question that Samuel Hawkins tried to ignore. Would it be consider a debate with one of the ID theorists? The answer is no. Hawkins and his cadre of new atheists have actually counseled against accepting invitations to refereed debates. The reason they give is the public is too ignorant, which is supposed to explain why they almost always lose their support of the audience, even at public universities. I've seen it happen many times. But what about that Scottish guy who supposedly refuted design? Is that true? I expect Dr. Hawkins knows that Hume's debate with the design analogy is disputed. But I wonder if he realizes that intelligent design theory is actually based on inference to best explanation. You see, modern Darwinism is based on the assumption that chance mutations can create new biological features that will be favored by natural selection. Dad, are you questioning the reality of natural selection? No, I am not. Natural selection is an accepted fact, but it only operates to select from pre-existing sets of features already coded into the DNA. What is disputed is the notion that mutations can create a new biological features, eyes, hearts, livers, kidneys, brains, etc. Well, sure, Dad, those organs are too complicated for chance, but what about all the little steps that could add up to a new organ? Andrew, you just hit on one of the decisive problems for evolution. Scientists now know that the smallest biological features are likewise too complex to have originated by chance. For example, within the most basic unit of life, the cell, are tiny organelles. These subcellular organs likewise possess complex biological features which have countless interdependent parts that could not possibly originate by chance. In fact, the same argument applies at every step. So in the end, there's nothing new for natural selection to select. And don't forget the complexity of the DNA that codes for these features. In short, evolution cannot explain either the irreducibly complex features of life or the coded design message. Well, okay, I may not understand why Hawkins and so many other scientists say evolution is the best explanation, but they seem to be consistent in their rejection of intelligent design. With a smile, Dr. Elder said, I really don't think so. Does anyone doubt for a moment that if an irreducibly complex message were picked up from outer space, evolutionists would call it reasonable that the source was intelligent extraterrestrial life? Hey, Dad, maybe you should take this guy on. No way. Forgive me if I come off as having all the answers. I do not. There are those who are well equipped for public debates, and I am not one of them. Sounds to me like you're chicken, Dad. Okay, I think I've said enough. With that, Dr. Elder grabbed the remote control and flipped channels until it landed on a rerun of Gilligan's Island.